I want to welcome you to the California Museum. My name is Sharon Ito. It's good to see lots of familiar faces, family, friends, new faces too. This is the Northern California Time of Remembrance. It's presented by several JACL chapters. Florence, Sacramento Valley is here. Also Placer County and Sacramento, those chapters, and the California Museum. The time of remembrance is when we look back on that day in 1942 when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. Our special guests, they are leaders in their field, and they're terrific. Duncan Williams, he's the founder of the Ireichō Project, the Book of Names. How many of you have signed the Book of Names so far? How many of you went to Los Angeles to the Japanese National Museum to sign the book? Our other guest is Naomi Oswald Kawamura. She is the Executive Director of Densho. How many of you listen to the podcast? Naomi, Rachel Dow's podcast, Burn Order. Densho played an important role in that. Both of our guests, they're preserving history, and that's what the theme of this event is, preserving history, but they're also protecting the truth of the Japanese American incarceration. And we'll talk about the past, we'll talk about the present, and if we can draw any parallels between what happened then and what's happening now. And we'll talk about a lot more, including your questions and answers, okay? So we want to acknowledge a few guests. Go ahead and stand up or wave when you call your name. Professor Mitsuhiro Sugata, Cal Poly Humboldt's Criminology and Justice Studies program is here with your students. Where are you? Did you wave? I need to know where you are because I have to call on you during the question and answer for extra credit. Go Lumberjacks, go Jacks, right? Also, we have the Episcopal Diocese of Northern California. They have 9 representatives, I'm told. So thank you for joining us. Congresswoman Doris Matsui wanted to be here. Unfortunately, her sister passed away, so she is not here. But her representative is Aaron Jones. Amy Katzman, she is the Dean of the Sacramento State Library. Right up front. The Japanese American Archival Collection is at Sac State, and some of your families have artifacts and oral histories there. I've just been told, is it true you're going to turn the Japanese American Archival Collection into a research center?
It is a research center.
It is a research center, but
we have undergraduate fellows who are now funded to come and do research.
That's great. So undergraduate fellows who are being funded to do research because there are millions of documents there, a lot of documents. Also from the Sac State Library, Julie Thomas, archivist for the Sacramento Library of Special Collections, and you know almost everything in the Japanese American Archival Collection as a curator for many, many years. Japan's NHK Broadcasting is here. They're doing a story. I believe they may be focusing on Mr. Mitz Yamamoto. My dad tells me that you're turning 100 years old. Yes. So I saw the birthday card on the table for you. We also have a number of other reporters. We have reporters from Nikkei West and Asian American News, and I think Nichibei Times is also here. Nichibei News is also here. And then past president of National JACL, Floyd Shimamura. Hopefully I got all of our special guests. If not, let me know. All right. Right now, Please welcome the Executive Director of the California Museum, Amanda Meeker.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the California Museum. I'm so happy you all could be here tonight. Are you able to hear me? Yeah, I'm taller. Anyway, I understand we have a sold-out crowd today, which comes as no surprise given our stellar panel coming up this afternoon. I would first like to acknowledge that we stand on the ancestral lands of the Nisenan people and the Valley and Plains Miwok peoples, who steward this land, as did countless generations before them. I'd also like to recognize the incarceration camp survivors here today. We are honored by your attendance. As many of you know, the California Museum presents exhibits and programs about California's history, its diversity, and its influence on the world. Above all, we seek to increase civic engagement and inspire visitors to recognize their power to make positive change. A cornerstone of that effort is the Time of Remembrance program and its related exhibits. Since it came here from Elk Grove in 2000, over 100,000 students have participated in the program, which is led by camp survivors and their descendants. I want to give a big thank you to all those docents who share their stories and make the program possible. The students, as well as visitors to the exhibit throughout the year, learn about an event in our nation's history that must never be repeated. They learn about the profound harm that racism and fear, coupled with failed political leadership, caused during the war years and how those harms linger. Our goal is that they leave inspired to stand up for due process and for the Constitution, and that they speak up whenever they see injustices happening to any group of people. There have been moments over the years when I've had a sort of starry-eyed idea that someday that program would not be necessary anymore. This is not one of those moments. So it's heartening to me that the program continues educating generations of youngsters who will help lead us to a more just future. I want to thank the NCTOR committee for its long-standing support of the museum. We're so proud to host this event. And on a personal note, I'd also like to thank those of you here who have guided me over the past 25 years, first as curator and then as director. I'm retiring this summer, as some of you know. So this is the last time I will be addressing this event. The opportunity to be part of the Time of Remembrance program and the related exhibits has been the highlight of my career and what I'll always be most proud of. Please visit the museum this afternoon. In addition to our permanent Uprooted, an American Story exhibit, we currently have Kokoro, the story of Sacramento's lost Japantown, on display. And plus, of course, the Ireichō is here, and although permits to stamp are full, you can at least get a look at this amazing monument. So thank you again, and enjoy the program.
Okay, don't go away, Amanda. We have a special presentation with Mario Tsukamoto and Christine Minnick.
Okay, some of you will recognize this as a Dharma doll, and you see the big one on the bottom here that my mother used. And when you get a Dharma doll, you make a goal and you fill in one eye. And today, of course, we're going to have Amanda fill in both eyes, because think of what she has done. And I want to credit South State's Archival Collection partnership with the museum and Elk Grove Unified School District. Amazingly enough, that's the only district that still participates, although she's expanded it beyond the state. And I know I talked to a class in Connecticut. So we are expanding it, and I hope that some of you will use your influence to get more teachers to use what she has provided here. It is an amazing exhibit, and please, please go and visit. She is the original archivist. She is the one that has designed it, supported it, curated it, protected it, and turned it into something that's worthy of the 21st century, because kids can push a button, somebody talks to them, it's all high tech. And when we bring classes through, we have to turn the sound off, otherwise they'd all be pushing the buttons. So Amanda, thank you for your vision, your courage to take chances and put in an exhibit that is worthy of all of the work that we have put in. And I'm going to say one thing, it's not just the Japanese American Rock Animal Collection here. She has expanded it to represent all the cultures in California. That's amazing. So thank you. You fill in both eyes.
Amanda is doing this. I just want to add a few things. It's really a sad moment for us. When she first announced she was leaving, we all took a gasp. We have known her for over almost 25 years. She was here when we first moved the program here, and what is the most significant thing is this new exhibit is an award-winning exhibit, and it is one of the permanent exhibitions in this facility. So thank you, Amanda.
And then you can make it bigger later.
So Time of Remembrance is usually a fundraiser for the different JCL chapters, and it helps to pay for a volunteer coordinator here at the museum, and that person works with volunteer docents who helps with the field trips. This year, though, they're raising money for the two organizations, Densho and the Ireichō Project, so that they can continue their important work. So I think they're tallying up your donations and we'll have a grand total at the end. But I wanted to tell you, Mariel, while the Elk Grove district is the only district that has this requirement, right, to come to the museum, I checked with Rowan, who is the volunteer coordinator, and she said that last year, 46 schools throughout Northern California came here, and the docents, the volunteer docents, did 70 field trips. Wow. So that's a lot of hours. So thank you to all of the volunteer docents. Okay, so I'm going to move over here. I want to welcome our guests to get this conversation started. Will you please welcome Naomi Oswald Kawamura. She is the Executive Director of Densho. And Benjamin Williams, founder of the Ireichō Project. Executive Order 9066. So that's what the Time of Remembrance is all about. Think about it. Anybody with a drop of Japanese blood, whether an immigrant or a citizen living on the West Coast, whether a baby or an elderly bachan, all were forcibly removed from their communities, and they were sent to America's concentration camps after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. May I ask, how many camp survivors are here today? You don't need to stand if you don't want to, but raise your hand, and if you would look around, because these are people who experience the camp. Of course, as you know, your names are in the Densho, the Book of Names. All right, next question. How many descendants of camp survivors are here? Look at that. Your loved ones' names are in the Densho, and some of you have a chance to stamp those names. So I just want to say, first of all, I know you're a Buddhist minister. Can I call you Duncan? Okay. I want to thank you for bringing the Densho Book of Names to Sacramento. And Naomi, I want to thank you. You got a big shout out from Rachel Maddow, both on her podcast and Michelle. So good work. But let's go ahead and get things started and start with introductions. Duncan, would you tell us more about your background and then what inspired you to create the Ireichō Book of Names? And then maybe we'll have a picture of the book that we could show on the slide back here, the screen.
Thank you so much, Sharon. So one thing that really surprised people is I had no familial connection to the World War II Japanese American camps. I was born and raised, my mom's Japanese, but I was born and raised in Japan. And in Japanese schools, like high school, like you don't learn much about World War II Japanese American. It was not something that I knew very much about either. And so it was only when I came to this country when I was 18 years old to go to college and graduate school. And in graduate school, during the middle of my dissertation writing, my mentor, my professor passed away. And I had to help his family kind of clean out all of his books and letters and different things in his office. And it was then that I found these yellow pieces of paper that had his family name, Nakatomi, on it. And it was all in Japanese of the kind of World War II era Japanese. And what it turned out to be, it wasn't his writing, but it was his father's writing, a Buddhist priest called Reverend Shinjo Nakatomi. And it was his diary from Manzanar, and as well as his sermon notes of the things he kind of gave talks about every Sunday in the Manzanar Buddhist church, as it's called. And so this is back in 1998 or so, 1999. And at that point, I was studying something very different than, topics related to the World War II incarceration, but as a kind of like a way to honor my teacher and for the family who couldn't read the Japanese diary and the sermons, I actually decided to translate it. And so that was, I guess, 20 some years ago. That was when I first had to figure out what is metsuhōru, like what's a mess hall? Other words that were very peculiar in this diary about life in Manzanar, one of the camps. And so that's when I started my education around this topic, and in the process of translating that diary, a lot of people started to ask me, can you translate our grandfather's diary? So I started doing, I think I translated 17 different diaries for just as things for families, and quite a few of them were of Buddhist priests, and so therefore I kind of got interested in the topic about Buddhism and the World War II camps, and I wrote a book about that came out after about 17 years of research. I used Densho as one of the great resources for that research, but I also interviewed about 120 camp survivors for that book. But in the process, I came to realize, like, one of the ways in which the government treated, a whole community, as Sharon just said, without regard to whether you're a U.S. citizen or a Japanese immigrant, your little kid or your grandma, they kind of lumped everybody together and conflated everyone with the enemy. And in that kind of targeting, kind of just said the whole community, said one drop of blood. I was shocked to find out that mixed-race people like myself, who were, at that time California had an anti-miscegenation law that didn't allow, mixed marriages of certain races. And so as kids were abandoned or, given up for adoption. And there's an orphanage in LA run by the Catholic order. And when Carl Bennison, the architect of the whole 9066, was questioned about whether these mixed-race babies and 5-year-olds, were subject to 9066. He said, if they have a single drop of Japanese blood in them, I want them in camp. So as I was learning about all of this, it made me think about what would it be, what would reckon with that history in a way that would do the inverse or the opposite of what the government did? What would be something where you could give, because people were given due process, were treated as individuals, were lumped together like this and just treated as a national security threat. We thought, what if we name people with dignity and personhood and individuality? And in this Ireichō Book of Names, the way we sequenced it was, instead of just putting it alphabetical, which, as you can imagine, sometimes would have been the easier thing to do, number one, but also we found out, like, if you did it that way, then there's certain very popular Japanese American names like Mary Hayashi or George Yamamoto, and you get to the letter Y and you see like 100 and some George Yamamoto's in a row, which one's which. And so we said, what if we sequence these names by date of birth? Because no one has the exact same name and the exact same date of birth, so we can have a special, respectful spot in the book for each and every person. And so that became the kind of genesis of the project, was let's do the inverse of what the government did. Let's try to, I think the work, and now we will probably talk a lot more about this, but the work of doing remembrance is really, some people, focus on the preservation aspect of things, for preserving the actual buildings and records and all of that. There's the education part of it. And then there's a kind of like repair or healing part of it. And that's what this project, the Ireichō Book of Names project is. It's an attempt to not just acknowledge every single person in this book with a stamp, but have the widest possible American public's participation in it, so that as a nation, we can come to reckon with its history. And so that's the kind of backdrop to what we're attempting to do.
And Duncan has been on a nationwide tour with the Densho, and we'll get into that later. But Naomi, would you tell us more about yourself and what Densho is all about? And congratulations on 30 years to 30th anniversary.
All right, thank you. So I do have a slide deck for talking about Densho, but for myself, I'm Japanese American, and similarly to Duncan, I don't have a direct connection to the incarceration history. My parents are post-war immigrants, but I grew up alongside Japanese American friends whose families were incarcerated during the war, and that is the community that I feel kindred to, the one that I feel belonging and feel this responsibility to know the history. For my PhD research, I actually looked at how the wartime incarceration shaped the identities of Japanese Americans and Japanese Canadians as we understand it today, and used Densho quite a bit for that research. And I'm also the child of an atomic bomb survivor from Hiroshima. And what interests me since I was a child is feeling that I inherited responsibility towards stewarding memory, and I take that role very seriously, where I think a lot about what is my role as my father's child, to not let his stories be forgotten, and then what does that mean for my daughter, for which, the Second World War is even so far removed from her reality, to make that connected to who she is and why she's alive today. And so that sense of memory stewardship is how I think of the kind of work that I do. And so that's why I feel like the work I do at Densho is an extension of that sense of responsibility I feel towards the past. So I have a slide deck, so I will kind of go briefly, but I did want to just introduce the sort of rich resources that Densho has developed over 30 years. So we are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. It was founded in 1996. And so next slide. And so this is, I am here with my staff. We are rooted and founded in Seattle, but we've become, since the pandemic, a remote hybrid workforce. I have staff in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, in Texas, and in Washington. And so we mostly meet on Zoom. We do meet in person every year for our annual staff retreat, but this is during one of our in-persons in our Chinatown International District office. We rent our space from the Seattle Bezwin Buddhist Temple, which has sort of one of the oldest historic kind of Buddhist temples in the area. And this was their old daycare center facility, so we left some residue, like some doors have like little girls, little boys names on it and things, so kind of kept a little nod to what the building used to be. So our primary mission is to preserve and steward the history, stories of the wartime incarceration, and we do that to promote equity and justice today. So we do connect the past to contemporary events, and that is something that we do through our education and sort of our public scholarship. Next slide. And so it encompasses not just the wartime incarceration. So we also look at early immigration. We look at, I think, the Alien Enemies Act, xenophobia, to sort of legal history, sort of encompassing a full, rich conditions that lead towards incarcerating, rounding up, forcibly remove of people, to then the consequences of doing that action, and then also the redress movements of the community activism that led to reparations and a formal apology. Next slide. So you can access everything that we do through our website at densho.org. We try to make all of our resources freely accessible. So accessibility is a huge value of our organization. And so really the idea that our founding executive director, Tom Ikeda, had was to create a resource that what if you couldn't get to a camp? What if you couldn't get to JANM? What if you couldn't get to one of the sites of which where you wanted to learn your family history? Could you do that at home? And so at the time that they were founding Densho in the 90s, himself and a founding funder, Scott Oki, were working at Microsoft and recognized that streaming technology would eventually come to people's homes and that people will be able to, on their personal devices, be able to stream stories about the incarceration history and access materials. And so that's sort of the original founding kind of value that we continue to keep, where we want to make our materials available to you without any paywall or a subscription service or anything like that. So we continue to try to maintain that as a core value. Next slide. And so our founding is actually our oral history collection. Tom Ikeda is the child of former incarcerees of Minidoka. And so when Densho was coming to be formed, it was really children of former incarcerees were realizing their parents were aging. No one was collecting these stories systematically. They will get forgotten. What can we do to at least like have a place, a platform somewhere where their stories can be held and stewarded? And so this started the project. Next slide. And as Tom went and met with many different communities and people all over the country, people would bring with them diaries or letters or photographs. And so we realized we need to actually do something with these materials. And we have now a digital archive. So this is the Densho Digital Repository. And so a lot of the materials here is where we help journalists and folks like Rachel Maddow to contribute like oral histories or materials, primary sources that we have digitized. We are a post-custodial digital archive, meaning that we don't maintain physical material. We just digitize them so that families can keep their photographs or family heirlooms, but that we would have this sort of other way you can access that history, and that we would promise to steward them 30, 50, 100 years out. Next slide. And then as it evolved to oral histories towards digital materials, then we moved into historical context interpretation. If you're listening to an oral history and you didn't know what an assembly center was versus the DOJ or WRA camp, how would someone come to know that? And so Tom Ikeda hired historian Brian Mia to develop our Densho Encyclopedia, which is now one of the most comprehensive and reliable resources on Japanese American history that you could find. I used this so much when I was a PhD student, and I still actually will look up to see if maybe Brian wrote about something before I like look into something. So it's still an incredible resource that I think is one of our most valuable contributions. Next slide. And then, so then we've been working in primary sources and these sort of documents of a very heavily surveilled community. And so with these data points, in a sense, we have been exploring partnering with data science departments to explore what else could you glean from the train logs or to know the movement of people. People were not static during the war. People moved from assembly center to one location to another location. And so we created an online resource called Sites of Shame. And so we have identified about 100 sites. We typically think of the 10 WRA sites as like kind of when you think about the wartime incarceration, but there was actually about 100 sites where people were detained very temporarily to more semi-permanent. And so if you look at the top left, you see these yellow lines. So we have these filters that could show you like, where did people come from that went to Heart Mountain? And so you could kind of look at the locations of all the people who were incarcerated at Heart Mountain. And you see all the like lines that right moving towards Heart Mountain. If you look to the bottom right, this is where you do the filter of what happened to them after camp. You see all those blue lines of all of those Japanese Americans that scattershot, didn't return back home. And so to me, it's like such a visual representation of communities that were very much destroyed by design. So we continue to kind of work on these projects that do some close-ups where we have information. So next slide. And so this is Mansonar close-up, where we have figured out by the barrack where people were. So we're trying to do this with like, it's very resource intensive, and we actually work with a couple of different vendors that kind of datafy our primary sources, but we are actually talking with folks at Minidoka to try to do a Minidoka close-up next. And then in speaking of kind of connecting the past to the present, we do this primarily through our blog, The Catalyst. What does it mean? What to learn about the past to help us understand the current conditions, or how things come to be, or what are Japanese Americans wrestling with and thinking about. And so we sort of use our Catalyst blog as the forum through which we explore new ideas, contemporary ideas, or highlight new scholars and new research. So right now, as a nonprofit, we face a lot of challenges. I think last year was one of the toughest professional years of my life, I think. It's been a difficult climate for nonprofits, and particularly those of us in the humanities. There is founder succession. I'm coming after a founding executive director who led the organization for 7 years, and ensuring a lot of these other Japanese Americans are similarly kind of undergoing this sort of generational shift in the community and thinking about how to engage young people and younger Japanese Americans to come into the work and be mentored to lead these organizations into the future. We are responding right now to the current moment in many different ways. I'm sorry that it's so text heavy, but I was kind of trying to write notes, but we're going to be launching a public index of Japanese American collections. And so in terms of sort of seeing in the current climate the actual active erasure of the contributions of communities of color, of immigrants, that there was also the extended government shutdown that didn't let us access the National Archives for some time. The head archivist of the United States was fired. And so we actually started to think about what could we do that we are uniquely positioned to do, which is to sort of create a protective infrastructure for memory, for Japanese American memory, and try to make visible anywhere, small to large, where any materials related to Japanese American wartime incarceration history exist across the country, and also in Japan and Canada, Peru, et cetera. But we're going to start in the United States and start with a couple of researchers to help us start nailing down, and we will be doing a call out to the community to nominate your local museum, your local archive, repository, historical society, JACL chapter that might be holding materials that we should be aware of. And so that is one active area that we are partnering with the Takahashi Foundation to build. And then we also are going to be creating, like we have a standalone digital archive, an encyclopedia, Sites of Shame, an education platform that's designated to sort of designed for educators and for young learners, and taking kind of the educator lens of like, what would a young person need to know about this history? What do we want them to know and understand about this? And have a kind of a portal that's designed specifically more for education. And then we're expanding our collections. We're very West Coast heavy. So Densho staff will be traveling to Seabrook, New Jersey, to Twin Cities, and to Chicago to do some community scanning and conversations with folks in different regions across the country this year. And then we are also fiercely at work to launch a new oral history initiative to capture how Japanese Americans are experiencing the moment right now, and how are they understanding and kind of constructing their understanding of the present as they connect it to maybe their family's wartime incarceration past to today. And so we will also be sort of beta testing what an oral history project that focuses on that could look like. And then Next Gen Initiative, I think I have a staff person here, I'm not sure if she's here or not, but Amy, I have some younger staff who's come onto Densho's team who represent Gen Z, and that we are trying to build a specific initiative to actively, proactively, and explicitly engage with younger Japanese Americans into the work that we do. And so these are some of the things that we've been working on that we're going to be building on for the next 3 years or so.
So it's densho.org, and Duncan, you said you went on there when you did some of your research. Someone recently asked me what years, first, where my mom was in camp. And so it was in Arkansas, and she was in both Roar and Jerome. And then he asked, well, what years? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll check the National Archives. And so I'm looking on the National Archives, and that wasn't easy to search. So then I went on to densho.org, and sure enough, my mom's name came up with the years that she was there. Yeah, so it's really a useful resource. Yeah. This morning, Duncan, you were at the Valerga Assembly Center site, and you did a memorial service. So I should have said Duncan he's a Zen Buddhist minister. He is also a professor of religion at the University of Southern California. So tell us about the service that you conducted this morning.
Sure. So sometimes we go with the book to the sites of incarceration, and one of the things when you interact with the book is that in addition to stamping the names, we invite people to touch this ceramic tile piece that contains the soil from 75 different WCCA assembly centers and WA camps, the Department of Justice and ARC camps, and a whole number of temporary detention stations. And so we had this idea, bringing all of the names to come into contact with these various sites is meaningful, and our project is kind of born out of what people back in World War II themselves did about trying to do ceremonies and rituals of memory by building these Ide monuments. There's one in Manzanar called the Ireichō, one in Namachi, also with the same name, and one in Rower in Arkansas called the Ireichō. But they were built as a way, the word Ide means to console the spirits. And so our project is about taking all of these names as a kind of witness and a way to recall all of those who've gone before, to not just heal families and kind of intergenerational, I would call it racial karma of this nation, but also to heal the places that we go to. And typically we recite all of them. We had camp survivors who were there, recite the names of those who passed away in that place, because that's why those monuments in Arkansas, Colorado, and California were built. But in terms of Valerga, the local, here in the Sacramento Valerga Assembly Center, it was only open for 52 days. It was only open for 52 days, and so there's not a huge number of people who passed away, but there were 5 individuals who passed away in that 52-day period, as well as 5 babies who were born. And to remember Japanese American World War II history is not just to remember those who passed away in terms of the loss, beyond losing people, one's livelihood and homes and farms and businesses and freedom, but also losing loved ones in these places. That's why we say the names of those who passed away. But it's also remembering that this is a community that survived, persisted, was resilient, and so we also set the names of 5 babies born in camp, and including one of the babies born in camp, Evelyn Shokuyo, was able to attend today, and she had her oxygen and so forth. It's not necessarily easy for her to attend, but she stamped her own name at the site where she was born. And so these are the type of ceremonies that we like to do, and maybe I can end with this thought that the reason why those people back in World War II made these monuments, and this is how we're inspired to do these ceremonies and do this ritual of stamping, is because they had a vision of what it meant to build monuments or remember when the government would rather forget, erase, kind of not care about this community. They wanted to make sure that even without any governmental help, they could build something of memory. And so what I learned, and Reverend Nawatomi, the person I mentioned earlier, who wrote that diary from Manzanar, he wrote that first year of Manzanar, he had to do so many funerals and memorial services as a Buddhist priest, and he wanted to make sure in time for the Nimo, the first Obon after people pass away, is an important one to remember them. So he wanted to build it by August 15th of 1943, and that's when they were able to build that monument that still stands today. And he wrote those characters, Ireichō. He practiced in his diary, he writes about practicing again and again and again. He also writes about how to console the spirits of those who passed away is only half the equation. The reason you do memory work, remembrance work, ceremonies, building monuments, is to console the spirits of those who remain. That's part of the work of healing or consoling. And so that's the type of ceremony we try to hold this morning.
So the former Walerga Assembly Center, and that's where most of the folks in Sacramento were first sent before they were sent off to the permanent camps. I think all you see now is a plaque that's there. So the service that you held was very memorable and meaningful and beautiful. And you've done, as you're saying, similar services. As you go to other assembly centers, the sites at the former camps, you're doing these services.
We've been going to all 10 of the WRA camps. We've been going to some of the Department of Justice camps like Fort Lincoln in North Dakota or Crystal City in Texas, and at each of these sites trying to do these ceremonies of different kinds. And in the last 2 WRA camps we went to were the ones in Arizona, Poston and Gila River, which are both on Native American or Indian tribal reservation land. And what I found most moving to do the ceremonies at that kind of place was to have the involvement of the tribal community, from the elders to the youngest people who live there all year round to protect these World War II sites for Japanese Americans. And so our practice with the ceremonies that we do together with Native peoples is to find a way to, in a kind of ritual way, in a ceremonial way, in a more emotional way, find ways to think about this history from a more personal point of view. And so our practice has been for everyone to stamp the next name that hasn't yet been stamped, especially because the people who died in camp or who never got married, never had kids, they don't have any descendants to come and stamp for them. And so we need everybody's help to make sure everybody gets at least one stamp and not be left out. And so we had, little, I think she was called Miss Colorado River Indian Tribe junior princess. So, like, the stamping, part of the ceremony, ritual ceremony we were doing on site was having native peoples dancing and drumming, and they were chanting their things as we were chanting our Japanese Buddha sutras, and so their participation on the next name felt very important. Of course, for Japanese American survivors and since we turned the pages to all the meaningful names for the family, grandma, so on, so but to have everybody's involvement in that way, both in ceremony and in the stamping. This has been part of our experience of what has made this book feel like every day as a monument. It feels like it's getting heavier, like more weighty, more meaningful, more significant. And as the monument changes and transforms, and getting closer and closer, we're as of last month, I think we're around the 94,000 names have been stamped out of the 125,000 included in the book. And so getting these type of broader community to come and make this a big American project of repair and remembrance, this has been part of our goal.
That's beautiful. Keep in mind, so America was only open, you said 52 days. 5 babies were born. The United States saw those babies as a threat to national security, right? I wanted to get a backstory from you, Naomi, about the podcast, Burn Order, because you've really got a huge thank you from Rachel Maddow. So can you take us behind the scenes and tell us some stories?
Quite boring because it's just the transfer of digital material. But I think this is kind of what we do. We make our materials accessible so that storytellers, journalists, authors, researchers can have these resources that I think are quite rich. We work very hard to try to continue to make them more and more comprehensive and have breadth and diversity of perspective and voices so that then they can go on and use our materials to tell new stories or create new scholarship. And so it's the same with the Burn Order podcast. The production team contacted us about a year ago or so that they were developing this concept, and so our staff just really works with them on kind of what themes, what oral histories might be the best fit. And so I think Ireichō Yoshinaga's Rachel Maddow's podcast kind of kicks off with the story of this young person in an archives.
Did you know she was born in Sacramento? Ireichō, yes.
Oh, I love Ireichō's story so much because I think Ireichō's story really tells the importance of archives.
She really found a smoking gun.
Yes.
But go ahead.
But I think
listen to the podcast.
And so we are creating, with our education resources, like a companion. If you're listening to Burn Order, here's an extended version of the oral history that they might have used, or here's sort of a digitized version of the primary source that they're talking about. So it's just not at the top of our list of things we're working on right now, but we are almost there. So we'll probably publicly launch that so that you can sort of see what other materials that the production team used when they were creating the podcast.
Okay, for those who listen to the podcast, did you know about the Burn Order? Yes? How many didn't know about the Burn Order? Okay, so for those of you who haven't listened to the podcast, do you want to know what the Burn Order is? Oh, are you prepared to tell us what the Burn Order is? Okay. So Ireichō finds this smoking gun. So up until the early 1980s, the story from the government is the incarceration was done because of national security. Japanese posed a threat to national security. Keep in mind that the U.S. was also at war with Italy and Germany. But people of German and Italian descent were not rounded up en masse in the way that the Japanese community was. And so Ireichō is this retiree, but she's interested in research, and she actually teams up with an inmate who, I guess, was in prison because he was a conscionable objector to the Vietnam War, turned lawyer. Okay, so I go in this lawyer. They start doing this research and they find the one document that's left. There were 10 of these reports. All of them were burned. It was a burn order to get rid of the documents because when this team found the document, it said Japanese Americans pose no threat. There was a lot of FBI and intelligence research done before Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and they said Japanese Americans were not spies, they were loyal, and that the internment is what they called it. The internment was not necessary. And so this came to light, and that set the stage for cases of several Japanese Americans who fought the incarceration. Their cases were overturned, and it paved the way for redress, for the government to apologize. It was wrong to pay reparations, and Japanese Americans changed the course of history. So that was the burn order. Please listen to it, Rachel, Matt, will appreciate it, right? But that's the story, and isn't that amazing? And if folks didn't find that in the National Archives, and it's hard to search that National Archives, your Densho webpage is so much easier to find.
Yeah, I think the difference too with Densho is that we feel most accountable to Japanese American community first, and so sort of thinking about what would former incarcerates and their descendants be looking for first as kind of one way that we hold ourselves accountable to make the history really useful to the people that was sort of initially founded this organization. And so that's a different vantage point than maybe a larger institution in which the Japanese American kind of story might be more peripheral and not central. To us, it's central.
Well, both of you, I'm sure, have met really interesting people in your line of work, and Doug especially, as you're going around the country and meeting folks who are stamping this. And would you share some of the stories that you're hearing from camp survivors who are looking at their names in this book that's going to be around for generations? And then descendants, what are they saying? What were some of the memorable people that you came
That's a
across?
great question. We had a 106-year-old individual the other day in San Jose come to stamp her name.
Is that the oldest?
She was 106.
She was 106.
And there was, she was coming out of stamping and met somebody who's like 102 or something. And they knew each other, and then he was like, I feel so young. So, and in Chicago, we had somebody 103. So I think I'm so impressed by the people, because it's not typically just that person, it's their children and grandchildren, sometimes even great-grandchildren. And you get to sometimes create these opportunities for connection and transmission of stories and you know, to support great-grandma to come, you know, like people have to organize themselves. So it's been amazing to see the elders, I think. Maybe the one that sticks in my mind the most is one individual who had made an appointment. He came up to me just a little bit distraught about the fact that his wife had passed away some weeks or so before the appointment. And she wasn't able to, they were supposed to go, they were both cancer survivors, so they were going to stamp their names, but also the different sides of the family. But he felt like he wanted to keep the appointment to make sure he stamped the names that his wife would have stamped. And I found it powerful. So, but then he was like slowly apologizing to me about the fact that we tend to say to people, please don't push the stamp, but don't, you know, touch the book per se, just because it's fragile, and we have to preserve. But he said he came, did all his wife's family members until he finally found his own wife's late recently passed wife's name, stamped it, but then he couldn't, he said, help himself, but he leant down and kissed the book. The name. And he was like, I'm sorry, that's breaking the rules. And I was like, but what that episode reminded me of is that whether, we've had other people who cried onto the book and those tears have kind of soaked into the pages of the book, or whether it's that kiss, there's something people are leaving of themselves and of the memories. And somehow the camp survivors who, whether the 106 or this other gentleman's a little bit younger, it's something about like the monument gets its value from all of these touches, all of these stamps, all of these feelings that go into or is behind each stamp. And so I think, obviously I've seen great things where sometimes camp survivors don't want to stamp their own name, and they'll get like their 5-year-old great-grandchild, and sometimes they miss or something, but it's okay, and that's kind of the point, is that it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have, we can have these smudges, or it can have a tear, or it can have, and that's actually, making the book what it is.
Earlier, oh, go ahead.
Is it on?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a story, which is I was part of a Japanese American leadership delegation. We were going to go to, 10 of us were going to be sent to Japan, and so they were doing an orientation for us at JAN. At the time, the Ireichō was there. And so one of my friends who was on the delegation was like, oh, I know my dad was born in camp. I know the year he was born, and this is his name, and I know which camp, right? So he goes to can't find his dad. And so he's like, that's so strange, I don't know where he is. And so I said, you know what, I'll task Brian Nia, our resident historian, because he likes puzzles, he'll figure it out. And so Brian finds somebody that sounds like it could be his dad, same year, different name. So then my friend calls his dad, and his dad says, you know what, I've never told anyone this, but I was adopted in camp. So his birth name changed as he left the camp. Never told a soul. He never told his wife that he was adopted. And I was like, that is so interesting that then he just unloaded all this history about his past. And it's something that my friend was like, he never talked about any of this at all. Never talked about his childhood. And I asked if we could record him at Densho as one of our narrators. And so then we had Tom Keita fly down to meet him. We did an oral history recording, and then his father passed away not too long afterwards. And so Derek is my friend. So it just was so wonderful, not only for the project and the opportunity to sort of then go back and stamp the name of his dad, but then to sort of know more about his history and have his dad be offloaded of the secret he's been carrying for so long, and then to be free of it, and then for us to sort of record and validate his experience and his childhood and the consequences of, being raised by those that suffered such a trauma, in essence, and rebuild their lives. It was so moving and such a powerful intersection of kind of our work.
And one of the, I should mention, I've been talking about the Book of Names, but we have a collaboration with Densho, the website, the Ireichō, such that, because I think one of the things that, one of the aspects of, there's just the name in the book, because we don't want it to be informational, right? We want to be more emotional. But people do want to find out more. And so we send them to the people who do that best, like Densho. And we have an arrangement where if somebody's oral history or photograph is in the DDR, the Densho Digital Repository, it's linked to the plaque that's in our Ireichō, the website, where the website, has the name, birth year, and then all the camps the person was in, but in this little, mark that you can click to, which flips the plaque. that shows the photographs and the oral histories of the Densho. So that when you click on that, it takes you over to the Densho environment to learn more about the person, behind the names. And so that's very important aspect of each stamping opportunity. People have to kind of, cousins are exchanged, like, when was Grandma born? Like there's that conversation, but then there's, as you said, that which happens afterwards of peaking interest, learning more, learning unexpected things, and going to places like Densho to learn more.
You mentioned the 103-year-old from Chicago, and I think you wrote about that, and that was very moving. Do you want to share that story too?
Well, she was very excited.
She was the oldest at that time.
This was back in the fall. She was the oldest. She had heard that we had 502-year-olds come in, and she was like, I'm 103. And she was very happy to be old. But she was like, I really need to also, I'll stamp my family, but I also have a childhood friend, somebody known since age 5. But I'm pretty certain she's passed away. I'm pretty certain she never had kids. No one's come to stamp her name, and I want to find that name. She's more eager to find that name than finding her own or her family members, and she's just intent on that. And so Mary Sawasawa, who's I think the third wife of Gene Smitchen, the novelist, that was her childhood friend. So we searched for her, found her in the book, and lo and behold, she was right. Nobody had come, no descendants, so to come and stamp for her. So she stamped that name. And so I think, to me, it showed something of some camp survivors who not that interested in stamping their own name, but more interested in trying to think carefully about who they want to remember. And sometimes it's family members, of course, but sometimes it's these other people that you think like, oh, maybe nobody's come for them.
If you go on to Densho, they highlight certain oral histories every now and then. And I've listened to one, I think his name was Frank Fuji. And, stories are coming out much later in life, right? For so many years, people didn't talk about the whole camp experience. But Frank was saying that his dad was imprisoned right at the start of the war. And the family didn't get reunited until 3 years later. And so they reunite, and the father's saying hello again to all the family members and to friends in the barracks. And then he looks at this kid, but the kid in 3 years that they were separated has grown up. But the father just goes, who's that boy? Right? And it was Frank, who was much older, right? He said that remark hurt him for years. And even as he was telling the story, you could see that it still hurt him. But he was saying that the camps, looking back, it really changed family dynamics and it broke family bonds. But not only that, he said that his dad's imprisonment left him a broken man. And some people, descendants, will say, so that explains why so-and-so acted a certain way. That you may not think, or folks may not think that the camp experience is passed down through generations. Sorry about that, passed down through generations. But there are certain things, people call it intergenerational trauma, but even little things. My family never went camping because my mom didn't like dirt and dust, right? But it's true, we never went camping. That's how opposed she was to camp. But any other stories that come to mind? I mean, you shared one oral history, but any other things that you're finding?
So much a story, but I think just the idea when we talk about kind of intergenerational trauma, it's not that you experience that event yourself, right? So it's similarly to my dad, he survived the atomic bomb. I don't think of myself as having experienced any war in that sense, or that kind of violence, or living in a post-war environment of a city that was destroyed. but it's raised by someone who did experience that. So similarly for the children of former incarcerees, they're raised by people that experienced something that was profoundly challenging and traumatic. And that in and of itself is its own unique experience and perspective that has value because it shows the consequences of what happens when you target, forcibly detain, remove, and incarcerate a community. And then there's long-lasting consequences.
One of the elements that, from a Buddhist priestly kind of point of view, I always tend to think about, like, well, how does karma work? Because we tend to, like, you know, good action, you have a good, you know, result, bad action, bad result. And sometimes it's not just as an individual person, but it can happen on a more collective basis, right? Like a family, a city, a nation. And I remember the words of Reverend the Imam from San Jose. He was in Crystal City when he said, in reflecting on his experience of being in that camp and being separated from his family, he said, there is a karma of a nation. And he said that in the 1970s, which is kind of a pretty radical thing for a Buddhist priest to say, but that this nation has a karma. The way Buddhists tend to think about karma, negative karma or trauma or these types of things, how do you heal from that? There's one way where you try to actually look at it carefully and transform it, and another way where you're like, that's a downward negative spiral. You need to just let that be, and then you create a positive spiral to kind of offset. And I maybe it just reminds me of the Ireichō, the monument that's built in Arkansas. The way Reverend Daitetsu Hayashima, who served up here in the Bay Area before the war, he had a theory about how you transform negative karma. Basically, when they built that monument, he, I think, anticipated that this being in a barbed wire, you know, surrounded by barbed wire, there's going to be some kind of negativity, some negative karmic consequence that could easily be passed down over generations. But he wanted to build something that would do a different spiral and also, and at the same time, transform the very things that were doing the harm. And so he cleverly came up with this idea, like, let's build this monument, we'll call it the Ireichō tower to console the spirits. But instead of just making it without thinking, he was like, I think they did it immediately, but they took some rebar and some barbed wire defense line, and they used it inside the concrete to give it structural integrity. And there's a Buddhist metaphor and text that he quotes as how he came up with this idea. It's called the lotus flower that blossoms above muddy water. And it's a metaphor that's about the muddy water is the hardships and difficulties of life, the negative karmic things, and the flower, the lotus flower, is the Buddha's awakening or enlightenment or liberation. And basically the idea is like, maybe you can transcend all of these difficult negative things if you can do certain things to kind of rise up above it. But his explanation was that lotus flowers, or any flower really, can't grow in sterile or pure water. It needs the mud to have the nutrients to actually grow like water. And so he was like, we're going to use the very things that are taking away our freedom, the barbed wire, the fence line, and we're going to use it to create something else, to transform the mud into the flower, into something that represented the community's feelings about memory and freedom. And so that's why it still stands there as a testament to that kind of philosophy. And to me, like, these people from back then, they were already starting to think about there's going to be a negative resonance or impact that is going to go down in history, and we need to do something. And I think all of us here gathered today are trying to do something as well in our time, because each time requires its creativity us how to deal with all of this type of history.
I wanted to bring the conversation to today. And if you see any parallels between the Japanese American experience in the incarceration camps and what we're seeing as far as the migrant community. Because Densho's broader goal is, and I would say all of our broader goal, is to make sure that what happened to the Japanese Americans does not happen to another community. So will you tell us what you're seeing today and the parallels you might see?
Yeah, we definitely make kind of contemporary connections to today because the past is only relevant to people who are existing today, right? So it's like we make use and interpret the past to make sense of who we are today. And so that's how I approach our work at Densho, is that it can hopefully help. For us, we've been focusing on young people to understand what are the conditions that lead up to a government choosing to target, based on identity, a group, and then round them up. That this is dispossession, this is incarceration, this is forcible removal from along the Pacific coast. So that kind of racialized policy making, xenophobia, how to kind of run a fear, because part of what happened before Executive Order 9066 was to cultivate hatred of Japanese people, right? To be suspicious of them, that your former neighbor, your friend, to assume that there's some espionage, spy, loyalty to their heritage nation first, to sort of get public kind of consensus that somehow this might be okay, right? So I think that that's where there's a lot of activity I see in the Japanese American community, because we want to see more people stand up regardless of our identities, that when we see something, even if there's legality around it, you know, Jim Crow laws were illegal, like, you can't sort of stand on that to say like, it's illegal, It's like, I think to be on the right side of history, we are not seeing, like we said, personhood. You're not seeing people's humanity. You're not seeing children and families being stripped apart. I was at the Crystal City pilgrimage when Doug did the ceremony there, and that DOJ camp had a lot of children. There was a number of schools there. There was also 2 little girls that drowned while they were incarcerated there. And so the local community named a street after the 2 girls, and you see this sense of children being targeted as spies or as terrorists, or that characterization I find echoes in how we start losing sight of human beings and what we're doing to people right now. I see echoes of that history in that. And so we are doing connections where we can, where we are archivists, we're historians, we're writers, and so the lanes in which we can support advocacy groups, we have been, and using our platform to kind of make those connections, to talk about any correlations that we are seeing. That that's sort of where our staff and our organization are.
I guess I have been seeing, the great work of Densho and others who do the kind of history work and why history is so important to inform our present time, as something where if we really look at the long period history of the United States, there's like 2, I tend to think about it as like American history is like this pendulum that goes from one kind of narrow vision of America to a different, more expansive, broader, diverse, plural vision of America. So the World War II Japanese American is not the first time that race or religion has been used to target and exclude people, right, from belonging, from being part of the American fabric. Think of the Chinese exclusion, just even to Asian American history. The Senate debates had to do with these heathen Chinese, that was the kind of slur word at the time. These people who are racially unassimilable, religiously unacceptable because they're not Christian, need to be excluded. And that's the first immigration law. And when we think about today's immigration debates, this is not the first time that so history allows us to see a much longer view that sometimes these debates about who belongs and who's excluded is not a new debate. And that, but on the side of those who believe that America is not just a white Christian nation, but a religiously plural and diverse nation, as well as an ethnically diverse and plural nation, can also look to people like George Washington, who in one of his important letters in the Washington collection, you see him writing about who is welcome in America. He says it's not just the rich, but it's people from every part of the world who, even if they are poor, want to come to this country to make a better life. You see people like Frederick Douglass, when he was, enslaved person who, famous abolitionist, who was one of the few people spoke up against the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 19th century, who talked about, his famous Boston speech on the composite nation, that this nation is made of many creeds, many religions, many peoples from around the world. These are the people who have a certain vision of America that is open. These debates have been going on since the founding times, but for us, I feel like, can move the pendulum. You know what I mean? It's not passive. It doesn't just happen that things move in a different direction. Yes, history tells us there are these moments. This is not the first time this happened. But it also tells us there are people involved in moving that pendulum. And we, as one person, as a family, as a community, can get together to move that pendulum as well.
I want to just add to that. I fully agree. Where I think that's where I find it problematic when people say, "Oh, history, we're repeating ourselves." Instead of history is repeating itself, because then it sort of takes away our agency for change. What I'm interested in the past is what can you learn, because there are then people that were change agents, and then we see potential for societal change. And so I think what history can teach us time and time again is the resiliency and intelligence and creative thinking of people who build new worlds again and again and again. That's also another way of looking at why knowing the past is important, because it also, you can draw hope from the past, that this isn't a future that is determined for us.
Good discussion.
Yeah.
They didn't think they could talk for an hour. Sure. I said, you can talk for an hour. All right, it's your turn now to ask questions.
I got it.
Oh, yes. We've got folks running around with microphones. Or if you want to shout.
I can shout.
Okay, go ahead.
Something I'm really proud of is the fact that Japanese Americans, President Roosevelt formed a segregated Japanese American regiment, and these guys went on to fight in Italy and France against Germans, became the most highly decorated unit.
There's a microphone over there.
They became the most highly decorated unit in the history of the U.S. Army.
The 442nd.
442nd Regiment, right. Recipients of what's our nation's highest medal? Medal of Honor, 21. Second highest medal, Distinguished Service Cross, 73. And what's the award given when you're wounded or killed? The Purple Heart.
The most decorated unit for its size.
Yeah.
442nd.
They had to replenish the unit twice over, so about 8,000 Purple Hearts. So I just think about that, something that people should know about the fact that Japanese Americans were just loyal Americans, and so many of the guys fought for our country.
Do we have descendants of the 442nd?
Wow.
Ms. Yamamoto, did you have a comment? Right over there, Ms. Yamamoto. They're 100 years old. Congratulations, you're still a baby. Can you just, we'll get to questions, but this is a chance to hear from a camp survivor.
I am impressed with all the young people getting all this out. We these days I guess we
I think you're gonna have to hold the mic up close to this, face it.
these days, we did not, we were in it and we did not follow up on all this. But in defense of that, I like to say that we got $25 when we were at camp, and we were trying to do all of that, and hopefully we wanted our kids now to live the life we did. And so thereby, thank you to third, fourth, and fifth generations for putting us.
Do students from Humboldt have a question? Oh, we have one over here.
This is for Duncan. It's John Michelle. Hi. You mentioned that roar, that monument, and the blossoms coming from bud, which, are those blossoms on that monument, there's 6 of them that come up with one band? Are those representative of that story you're telling? I've tried to find out why those are there.
Yes, so the roar Ireichō has, if you look at the base of it, these kind of figurative lines that represent the lotus flower, lotus leaf, what do you call it, the bottom section of the flower, and then the kind of like mysterious looking pattern that goes up is supposed to indicate that is growing up. And of course, the roar monument is interesting because instead of a flower image at the top, which would have been the traditional Buddhist one, Reverend Daisaku Hashima, the Buddhist priest who made that monument, put a globe and a, American eagle at the top. So kind of this idea of, it was supposed to be like a, let's have a world peace kind of thing with the globe, but also kind of making a claim that we are Japanese and we may be Buddhist, but we belong here in America too. And that top freedom being the American freedom, but also this idea of freedom more generally in that metaphor. It's kind of locked into the kind of motif and design of that monument.
Other questions? You want to raise your hand? Folks have microphones. We've got one here from Aaron.
Yes.
From Congresswoman Matsui's office. Here's the microphone.
Yomi, in one of your slides, it mentioned how history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Just 2 blocks that way is a modern version of an assembly site called an ice processing center. In your experience looking at this history, is there a lesson you feel is most applicable to our current society as we grapple with a modern version of that dark time?
Well, there is a Japanese-American organization called Student for Solidarity that draws from the wartime incarceration lessons that we partner with, and they do frontline work to shut down family detention centers. And so they're the experts really on actually getting, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening. To shutting down those detention centers. Right now we're working on, we have a staff member who's in Texas, and we purposely are working in Texas to help support and think about how we can support teachers to teach difficult history in contexts that are not amenable to it. And so we've been working with different communities within Texas. I really apologize for that. I'm not doing anything.
Holding it a little higher.
Up to my,
Well, that and then also above the bread.
okay. And so we are kind of working on something right now because they're actually building an ICE detention center really close to an elementary school in San Antonio. And so right now we're kind of working on a strategy around that. But some of the work that we engage with that, we also are showing that we're doing some things to sort of help and protect the community. And so I'll just leave it at that.
I got an email though from your staff. I mean, I think they sent it out to all of your supporters, but it made a point of saying that your staff stands with migrant communities and urged people to record on their phones that it was important to record this history so that it does not get erased. Other questions?
I have a question. I introduced myself first as Alice Joe, former member of the school board with Elk Grove in the 90s, when we were kicking off this opportunity to celebrate the internment through our school district and to have displays up for the children. But I wonder about the Native American element here, because in many instances, the land of Native Americans was used for these camps. So I want to question whether or not in your travels, if you ever experienced any conversation about apologies to the Native American communities, such that the Japanese American communities got with the Korematsu decision and other opportunities for reparations. So has that ever been raised as an issue?
Yeah, I think when we think about the Japanese American case, part of why there was a successful reparations because it was a small community group. It had a sort of near-term time horizon. It wasn't so long ago that it felt like it wasn't this doable kind of apology. A lot of Japanese American and Japanese Canadian legal experts and lawyers have worked with First Nations and Indigenous groups around land reclamation kind of efforts and things that have some parallels with lessons learned from the Japanese American community that supports work for Indigenous sovereignty. We also actually did a whole kind of public program around supporting Black reparations as well, and sort of kind of connecting this reconciliation history as something that has cross-racial solidarities. As someone, I live most of the time in Canada, in Vancouver, British Columbia, and so what I've observed in Canada, there's been a lot of work in doing reconciliation work with Indigenous communities in Canada, and so I'm sort of drawing from what I've learned living there for about a decade into the work at Densho, so that we can kind of connect the stories of Indigenous peoples as a story of, when we talk about our immigrant settler story, that it connects to first Indigenous histories. So we are also doing work around that for our K-12 resources, and then some of the sites, including nearby, Jim, we were just at the mural, right? Sacramento, Japantown. There's the mural in the corner of Capitol. Yes, that I just was able to go to with Jim Tabucci this morning, is given permission, right, by the Indigenous band that is there. And so I think there's a lot of area for us to intentionally kind of begin to think about how we could more engage in this sort of cross solidarity action to support each other's communities' efforts towards reconciliation.
There's the kind of issue of how to get federal attention, in reparations. There's also, I think, an important thing that we just mentioned about these collaborations and cooperations across lines of communities. And so in North Dakota, I was on a committee, took about 4.5 years to build a World War II memorial monument for the Japanese. There's the Fort Lincoln internment camp there. It's on tribal land. It's on the campus actually of the United Tribes Technical College. And so for 4 years, and Brian Neer from Densho was also on the same committee. We worked very closely. The descendants of people who were in that camp from the Japanese American days worked with both a Japanese architect and a native architect to kind of, and we worked with the tribe as well as the leadership of the college, tribal college, to build this monument. And we last October or September, we took the Ireichō there as part of the opening of that monument there. And I think the kind of just working together is something, and designing together and thinking about layers of history together, that Native American people also were displaced and removed and placed in different kinds of confinement, and these kind of shared histories, I think, are important to reflect on together and work on together.
Any other questions from any of the students or the faith leaders that we have here? We're coming around with the microphone.
Thank you. First, thank you so much. My name is Keith Yamamoto, and yes, my parents and my in-law parents and grandparents were in camp. One half was Cooley Lake, another was in Heart Mountain. But when we look at history and we look at what the meaning of redress and reparation was, it was so that this would never happen again. So my question is, yes, there is a lot more resistance than 84 years ago. I mean, the millions of people on the street. How do you contrast the two eras? And two questions. How do you contrast the two eras? And is the resistance now large enough to really eventually have that impact, that because we're actually seeing a mirror image of what happened in 42.
I'm not going to comment too much because I feel like I've already given my take on it, which is that the pendulum, we come back to very similar type situations, and it requires the movement of the pendulum by the people of this time to move it towards a different vision. And so, as you kind of already noted, there are more people today. Back in the period, I remember, I think Ron Dellums of the, when he from Oakland, when he was congressman, and part of the Black Congressional Caucus, who was supporting redress, he would talk a lot about his 6-year-old, when he was a kid, Roland Yoshi, his friend, being taken away as something that really, he couldn't do anything about it at that time, but he found his time to stand up for Japanese Americans when it came time for redress. So I think we all do what we can in whatever time we are in, and so it does seem like there are more people speaking up, standing up, helping out in this moment, but it's also at a scale, right? That is also quite challenging. So I'm not a politics person, so I will give others to comment more on what is the real challenge of the day today. But I feel like there is more because of people, and because of it, like there is more awareness about how these histories are so important to keep in mind as we. It's because, as I said, it's just not just learning from the past and what are some examples of change makers of the past, but I feel like when we recall, and this is why we recite names, and we recall, like when we activate the memory of those who came before us and what they had to go through, I think it gives us courage. I think it gives us perspective. I think it gives us a refuge, like a protection. It's like you call on their names to kind of get your spine straight, that kind of thing. And so that's kind of how I tend to view it, but I don't, without getting into the politics, I'm not, somebody else can talk about that.
Natalie?
Yeah, I think that
What do you want?
there's green light.
There's a green light, okay. I think the current moment is calling more of us to rise, to maybe be uncomfortable, because we are dealing with, government officials telling us not to believe things we see. And part of a statement we had that we stand with the people that are documenting what is happening in the current moment, so that those histories can't be erased and can't convince us that this isn't happening. that this is done. So we really need to lean on our critical thinking skills to support young people to develop critical thinking skills and to really think about sources and sort of use historical thinking skills. Like what are you reading? What is this based on? What's the evidence? Who is writing this? Like what are their intentions? To really young people right now have access to so much information in a way that is just inconceivable. We really need to support young people to kind of understand what it is to navigate the sea of information so they could be critical thinkers and really be able to support and build a world that we all want to live in. And I think that that's why we've been putting more emphasis on our education programs, because we see that being a technology-oriented organization where we are thinking about how we will engage with AI technology, with Densho, and people concerned with, sort of using narrators, manipulating history, et cetera, and what are we concerned about. So we have these kinds of conversations at the staff level, and thinking too that young people really need to have support and figuring out how to filter the information that is just everywhere for them. And that I think that's one way that we can really support society right now. I think that has critical value. In terms of thinking ahead, I couldn't do this if I didn't have a little glimmer of naive hope or idealism or optimism towards the world that I want to live in and want my daughter to inherit. So I do have a faith and a belief that there are more of us, that more people like me that want to live in a world in which is inclusive and is pluralistic and values difference and different perspectives and is the kind of more multicultural nation that I think the United States is.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? We have one. Is that you, Julie?
Uh-huh.
I know you have a powerful voice. Julie Thomas, the archivist at SACSD.
I had a question, but after hearing this, I'd like to make a comment. And that I was actually in the Twin Cities as part of the resistance. And in answer to your question, the organization of the resistance was amazing. I just never stood a chance. People came from all over. And it didn't matter, brown and black people, they were hiding. But everybody else, community, suburbs, they were out there and doing it non-violently and yet forcefully. And one little story I have with that is on the plane that I was on. There were 3 people from California who were there to join the resistance. 2 of them were wearing shorts. And they found out what 840. But they were there fighting a good fight. My citizenship, my belief in humanity to one another has been completely restored.
Anything else? We have a few more minutes for questions if you like. Okay.
Hi, my name is Rita. I work for Rapid Response Hotline in the Bay Area, and I wanted to mention the Rapid Response Network as a system of what's happening to be able to make yourself feel like you can be involved. I'm a hotline coordinator and a case manager. I case manage like 7 or 8 families right now. All the families that I case manage, their primary provider was detained at an ICE office, meaning that they have a case of asylum, a green card, or a visa. So these aren't people that were just like on the street. They were purposely told to go to the office and then detained. You can become legal observers. I know Sacramento has a really good rapid response network, and you can share things online. But if you want more information, you can also come to me. You can also donate. Money is huge because we connect families to rental assistance programs, food assistance programs, and utility programs so that they can keep their housing and have the livelihood that they've been having. Okay, thank you.
Maybe time for one or two more questions if you'd like. Yes, go ahead over here. Wow, microphone coming down.
I was wondering if you had any, you mentioned Chris again, Duncan, if you had any insight into the prospect of reparations or redress for Latin American UK, and any thoughts about whether this might be a particularly apt time for that story, that movement to galvanize Japanese Americans, Asian Americans about immigration, state power, things like that. But I was also wondering about sort of bringing in and Densho's use of AI, or any other, the ways in which you anticipate using that technology for your work. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. So the Crystal City, when I was at the pilgrimage, I think maybe you also observed it, there was a lot of interest and scholarship and young researchers exploring Japanese Peruvian history. So I feel like this is this area that we will be seeing more new research, new doctoral dissertations, and hopefully new researchers in Japanese American history that expands our understanding of the really distinct, unique Japanese Peruvian experience, of which, they were sort of the community of which there was no redress, right? In terms of the AI, we're actually looking at it more for our back-end processing, so maybe applying the tools to help support the enormous amount of information that we have to right now manually tag or use, kind of explore ways that it improves our back-end rather than a user-oriented function. So, but we are kind of just thinking about it, it's on everybody's mind, right? So for our new education platforms, right now we're just still in the research phase, but we will try to see how we could develop something, because teachers will have to engage with the fact that the students in their classroom will be engaging and interacting or using ChatGPT, et cetera. And so how can we support teachers with prompts or ways that push young people to think without relying on such tools? So that is another avenue in which we're thinking about AI tools and its interaction with how people are learning about the past. But that's a very simple answer. There's other things that the tech team could go into more detail about what we're thinking, but it is just this area that we're focused on as an organization, because I know a lot of Japanese American historical organizations might not have the bandwidth or the kind of staff that we do to kind of explore or innovate in that area.
I'm not going to speak about AI. So, but on Japanese Latin Americans, even if the politics of our times is not suitable for gaining legislative victories in that area, I think, as Noah just mentioned, it's not, the attention, as you said, kind of, especially in this time when people from the migration from southern border, about illegality and so on, we think, well, what happened to Japanese Panamanian, Japanese Peruvian, Japanese Bolivian? They were brought to the State Department agreements to, basically kidnap people in these countries, put them on ships, and as soon as they landed in New Orleans and they stepped foot on American soil, being told, you don't have a proper papers and documentations and visas, and you're now the illegal alien, and now we're going to take you to Seagoville and Kennedy and Crystal City and all these different camps that the Japanese Americans were in. And so I think they are definitely part of this history too. And so for the Ireichō Project, we've made a great effort to make sure that we try to spell people's names right as part of the amendment process, but also make sure nobody's left out. Say all persons of Japanese ancestry, regardless of citizenship status, will be in this project. And so I'm glad to report that we have been taking a lot of care about the Japanese Panamanians in Fort Sill, Japanese Peruvians in Kennedy, Seagoville, and Crystal City, etc. And making sure that everyone is part of the acknowledgement of all names.
The camp wall and torrents.
And you also asked about reparations for blacks? Again,
Actually, well, specifically, I was talking about the Latin American League Day.
one more question, and I think we'll be able to, or comment.
I'll pass since no one did, but I think this one also, is there an effort by the area, I haven't been keeping up, but to include those who fled the West Coast to avoid being put in prison?
So the Ireichō Project and the Ireichō, the book, the way we've kind of organized it, we use this word, all persons of Japanese ancestry and their families, just because there were a few Mexican Americans, Filipino Americans, white Americans, black Americans who joined their families in these camps. And then, as I said, without regard to citizenship. And so whether you're Japanese Peruvian or Japanese national or Japanese American, who were incarcerated during the World War II period in these American camps. And so we say the World War II period because, for example, Crystal City was open until spring of 1947 when the war was actually technically over, but babies were still born. So we include all of those babies born in Crystal City right until the end of camp. But with that critical word, incarcerated, means that we say that you have to have been confined for at least one night in one of these camps. And so what you're talking about, I think, is that period in the spring of 1942, after Executive Order 9066, but before the civilian exclusion orders go up, there was that window of time when people left for Utah and Colorado and so forth. So we have two different sub-projects for the future, not in this book, but we are intending to publish a separate supplemental Ireichō for all of the people who were impacted by 9066, even though they don't fit the definition for our current project called incarcerated. They weren't incarcerated, but they were certainly deeply impacted, and in many of those cases faced severe discrimination, prejudice in places in rural Utah, etc. I Nawatoli family I mentioned earlier, the daughter was went to one of those sites. So we want to honor all of those people too in a separate project. And then a third one has to do, this third sub-project has to do with all those who were prior to Pearl Harbor, like already in the military. Many of their brothers, and parents went to camp, but they themselves didn't. So they're not in the Ireichō, but we also want to honor their military service as well. And so these are more difficult projects to make sure nobody's left out. So we're taking our time with that. So they're not out yet, but we are working on that as well.
I also want to add that when we approach our work at Densho, it is to include the experiences and stories of Japanese Americans who left, right? Because they wouldn't otherwise, their families from LA who then left and they lived in Utah now, they wouldn't have had this, not sort of xenophobia, the war had not happened. They were, I think Duncan used the word impacted. We are also looking and talking with a funder right now to explore what happened to Japanese Americans who were the renunciants and went to Japan and never came back, and really interested in their experience so that we can have a kind of fuller understanding of the Japanese American experience during World War II.
Wow. Okay, one more before we wrap up.
My name is Nancy Sakamoto Landers. My dad was served at the Fort Pretty Second, but he was in the Army. He and his brother went in June of 1941. They went in, my uncle was a student at UC Davis as a vet student. He worked as a houseboy, what they were called then, for a professor, and someone said, you join the army and they will pay for your education. Well, my dad came from a family of 8, and he and his brother were raised more like twins because they were less than 2 years apart. So he goes, well, can my brother come? And they said, well, what can he do? And he says, well, he's real mechanical. So they said, well, yes, we can have you both go to Fort Riley, Kansas, and work with the horses, and your brother can work with the motor pool. So they did. Then Pearl Harbor comes. They got shipped from the middle of the United States to Washington, to Fort Lewis, Washington, and were put in the stockade. And they stayed there until the 442nd was formed, and they went to Fort Shelby for infantry training, and then they were shipped off. They did separate them then. My uncle went to France, and my dad was in Italy. And unfortunately, my uncle was killed. My father did come back, but he was also injured, so he had the Purple Heart. I'm very proud of both of them. And one of the things my dad said when he died, he says, I want to be buried in a military cemetery. And my uncle was already in San Bruno. So he says, I want to be buried in San Bruno. Well, by then, it was closed because it was filled. But luckily, they said, well, if you can wait till September, my dad died in April, we are opening a new section. And the section where my dad is, we can see my uncle's headstone. And so, but I'm very proud of my family and what they did. My mother was in Amachi with my paternal grandparents. And that's where my dad met my mom, because before he got shipped over to Europe, he went to visit his family, and my mom lived next door to his sister, and she was her maid. And so they only knew each other for like the week that he was there, and when he got out of service, they got married, and they were married for over 51 years before my dad died. Thank you for sharing that story.
Well, how about a big round of applause for us? You guys are probably coming up, so I'll let the ladies get that together, but how about some final thoughts? We've got something coming your way, but some final thoughts as we wrap up and say goodbye.
I think in my job, I get oftentimes an opportunity to travel to different communities, and it always, I think the archivist from the Sacramento State kind of mentioned where you sort of feel a little bit like you feel energized again. Similarly here, I had breakfast with Jim Tabucci's working on protecting the Stockton Assembly Center and hearing about the different projects and the different ways people are trying to contribute and make the world better, to support change, to resist, to do this hard work really invigorates what we do, and just wanted to share that we are interested in so many stories and your family stories, and are continuing to actually have the active collection program. And so please think of us as your archive, your community archive for your families. Our commitment is to ensure that we continue to steward your histories 100 years out, and to be sort of an access point for future generations to know and learn this history without you feeling the labor or that responsibility that you have to hold it on your own. And so I think having these opportunities to connect in community, to learn about what each other is doing, always is really important to do that in person, to try to kind of connect with people in real life, in having a coffee with them, is kind of the world that I think we need to move towards. So kind of starting to move, and I say this as someone running a digital archive, that it really does matter to do these sort of in-person engagements, connect with people, see and recognize and see each other's personhood and our humanity, and I think that's part of the way we can kind of change forward.
I guess I with thinking about a poem or a sermon actually given by Reverend Yogen Senzaki in Heart Mountain. He was pre-war in LA, and as a Buddhist priest, he talked about the Buddhist vision of the world and used this metaphor called the jewel Dharmendra. It's like this, the metaphor is like the world is made of little jewels, like each one of us is a jewel. But it's like in a net, like a tennis court net, like there's these little knots. But not just that way, but in every direction. The whole world infinitely is made up of this very big net, and this little knots in between that make up the net are each of us as kind of jewels. And because the jewel, the metaphor says, is cut in such a way, it's like a diamond, and those sides are kind of acting like mirrors. So when you look deeply into one jewel, you can see all of the other jewels. And because all of the other jewels are also reflecting everything else, it's like we're all interlinked or interconnected. And I think that, to me, that vision that he gave in that sermon back in Heart Mountain in camp is important for us today. I always hear from a lot of, especially young people, like, there's these racial justice questions, there's economic problems, there's climate change, like, it seems just overwhelming as to what to do. And I think the message from that one priest in Heart Mountain was, we're interlinked. Our world is, everything we do matters, Every action to take, it doesn't, you don't have to change the whole web. You change your little part of the web, guess what, it's gonna refract and transmit to all of these other jewels. So we can actually just focus in on, like, what's my karmic connection, what's the area of suffering in this world that I can do something about, and just do that bit. And do it together with others, because I think that's the other message of the web of jewels, is that we're not alone. We're here together, we act together, we can strive to freedom, and can only do that together.
Thank you.
Mario, I'll need a mic. This is a Dharma Dao in recognition of not only your leadership and vision, but what you have been able to accomplish for Densho within the 30 years, but you are now bringing it forth into the 21st century, bringing it into a form that people all over the world now have access not only to our history, but to what happened to us, and hopefully to prevent similar happenings in the future. So on behalf of the NCTOR, we thank you for coming here, educating us, but mostly to also offer the kind of information that will change, I think, the future. So we think you should color both eyes, but if you want to make one small and then make it bigger and you achieve your goal more.
I'm gonna just leave one eye, maybe.
Oh, you're
The
gonna
work's
leave one
not
eye?
finished.
Okay.
The work is not finished.
Thank you.
Well, this was the same for Duncan. My goodness, Duncan, this has been a fantastic beginning of the week. You will be busy here with us until the 19th, and sadly, the spots have been taken for months. And I think one of my good friends says, I'm 45 on the waiting list. So in any event, Duncan, you have brought such an excitement to our program today. And what you do and what you're able to do through the Ireichō is just countless. I'd like to say one thing is, Sharon Ito here? I don't want to commit her to anything.
She may be out there preparing.
Well, I know all of you are here because you're attracted by what the Ireichō is doing, but they're going to be stamping from this afternoon from 3 to 5 and then every day until the 19th, through the 19th. They need a little bit of help. So if you have some time, I'm going to direct you to Sharon Ito because there are people, that we need to sort of lead people around and get them seated before their appointment, make up cards. So there's about 3 jobs that are very simple, no training required. I think you might have some time. I think openings were Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I encourage you to see Karen. So it's a way for you to be close to the Ireichō, otherwise you won't get that chance. So in any event, now, Duncan, for you too, since you've got 2 more projects, let's just color just one eye.
Work to be done.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Christine.
Oh, you're
Thank
so
you.
welcome.
We're going to wrap things up. You've been here for over 2 hours, and I appreciate that so much. A couple of announcements. As we heard earlier from Amanda Meeker, Executive Director of the California Museum, Time of Remembrance isn't just one day. They do all those field trips. It's an educational program, and it's terrific, and it's been going on for many, many years. Again, I said that proceeds usually go to that position that helps with the field trips, but this year, all of the donations and the sponsorships will be going to Densho and to the Ireichō Project, and it will be over $10,000 that you'll be sharing. We want to thank the museum, want to thank the technical help, folks who helped with the facility. Thank you very much. Other announcements. Outside, there will be some information tables. One will be the artist who did the mural, the Japantown mural at First Capitol, Karen Sugawa, will be there. And also there's that statewide project, the Torrance, actually a nationwide project, but the wall that will be going up Torrance with all the names of the Japanese Americans incarcerated. That project is underway. There's someone out there who can provide more information. Any other announcements, Ariel? Finally, I have to thank you. You've been a terrific audience, a sellout crowd, especially coming out on a Saturday to be here and spend so much time with us. And it does give me hope to see that you care about preserving history, truth, and our democracy. So I thank you very much. Oh, one more thing before I let you go. It reminds me, just will be quiet. Did you see Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl at halftime? Okay, what was the message on the big screen at Levi Stadium? The only thing, come on, more powerful than hate is love. Good job. Happy Valentine's Day.